This video is sponsored by Skillshare.
TikTok is turning the publishing world into fast fashion.
I've read Tower to Sheehan, right? It's just fast fashion, but for reading, they're just trying to make a quick buck.
Is that Red Tower's entire thing is sort of a sped up timeline to publishing. They want to make bingeable content, and so they have Fourth Wing in this rapid release schedule. But at the same time,
when you get into this overhyped, quote unquote fast fashion, great metaphor, you lose value, you lose quality.
Iron Flame, the sequel to the breakout hit of 2023, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, was released on November 7th, 2023 to midnight release parties, fanfare, excitement, and just general mayhem.
A local bookstore is now getting ready for a much anticipated book release, and they're doing it with a midnight release parties.
Only to quickly devolve into frustrations around misprints, printing mistakes, errors, poor quality printing, and even questionable writing.
There is not a rumor circulating that Iron Flame was written by AI.
Red Tower, an imprint of Entangled Publishing, and Rebecca Yarros issued an apology through Variety with promises to fix the issues. People's criticism on TikTok and Instagram quickly began to center around this idea that Red Tower is the Shein of publishing, with Bloomberg even publishing an op-ed entitled "TikTok is turning the publishing world into fast fashion." The formula is similar to that of retail drops, where brands release limited edition fashion lines that sell out in an instant. But instead of clothes, readers are snatching up books. Perhaps that feels like a relatively guilt-free purchase in comparison. In any event, they won't publish a ton of copies. Forced scarcity is their friend because it creates a never-ending altar of hype, but the quality of the physical book and the writing inside it gets sacrificed as a result. But is this a fair judgment?
Absolutely not.
Look, I'm not here to discuss the quality of the writing or the storytelling in Fourth Wing or Iron Flame, but I do want to dig into this comparison of publishing and fast fashion, because frankly, it's ridiculous. Not only does this show a deep misunderstanding of the massively important issues surrounding fast fashion today, but also just a general cluelessness about the history of the American publishing industry. To better understand how publishing works today and why these ideas around mediocre writing and fast fashion and publishing are misguided and problematic, we first need to dig into the history of popular fiction, the dime novel. Part 1. The history of the dime novel. The American dime novel was first released in June of 1860 by Beadle & Co. publishers. It was a cheaply printed novel with a saffron-colored cover that sold for 5 to 10 cents a copy. The books were about 128 pages long. They were works of fiction with a focus on very simplistic and easy-to-understand stories that had a mass, broad appeal. The prose was simplistic in its nature and intentionally easy to follow, thus making these books not only inexpensive for the lower classes to purchase, but easily consumable from a wide variety of literacy capabilities. However, the dime novel didn't just float and appear out of midair in June of 1860, but it is actually just a natural progression of how printed popular media was consumed starting in the 1800s. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, we see a boom in publication of printed media, specifically for newspapers and magazines. And while our modern magazines and newspapers focus a lot more on nonfiction writing, from journalism to recipes to DIY projects to just fashion discussions, in the 18th and 19th and all the way up through the mid-20th century, periodicals and newspapers actually would feature a lot of serial fiction. And these stories were also extremely easy to read. They were meant to have a broad appeal to a lot of people. And they would feature a lot of the popular genres and tropes of the eras. Cross-dressing, mysteries, romances, the Wild Wild West, sex work, sex trafficking, selling your teeth to pay for rent, and then all of a sudden finding out that the person that you're getting ready to marry, his sister was the one who bought your teeth, and now you get to spend the rest of your life staring at your sister-in-law's mouth. She's wearing your teeth because apparently she didn't even give them back to you. And let me tell you, Bridgerton ain't got nothing on that rags to riches story.
I know some men cannot perform without their familiar tools, like a child with a blanket.
Now, when the stories were really popular and successful, very often at the end of the story's run, they would be compiled together into one edition and just released as a book. A great example of this is Caroline Tracy or The Spring Street Milliner, or Life in New York from 1847 to 1848, which, by the way, is one of my favorite stories of all time. It is completely unhinged. I am not kidding. It is the most incredible piece of fiction, and I would love to turn it into a movie. So if there are any screenwriters out there who are really into history and women's stories and just wacky shit from the 19th century, shoot me an email. I'm desperate to turn this thing into a movie. Caroline Tracy was compiled and published by Stearns & Co. in 1849. And on the very first page of the book, they write, "The story of the Milliner's Apprentice was written for the Universe newspaper, with no design of collecting its chapters afterwards, or of publishing them in a connected form. But so great was the interest excited, both in town and country, and when the story was completed, there was an eager call from those who had already read it in the paper for its publication in book form." So to kind of put it into perspective, I kind of view this serial to book pipeline that was occurring in the 19th century as a sort of spiritual ancestor to AO3 or self-published books on Kindle Unlimited. The books are out there, and if they go viral and get really popular organically, then a traditional publisher will usually come and approach the writer for the story. It'll get re-edited, reworked, and then republished as a real, big air quotes there, book. Now, because late Victorian discourse around dime novels, as well as early research on dime novels, centers around the male author and the male reader experience, we've been led to believe that dime novels were only ever catered to men and boys. In fact, the very first dime novel was written by a woman. Beatles Dime Novels, number 1, The Best Story of the Day, by the star of American authors, Mala Eska, by Mrs. Anne S. Stevens. Anne S. Stevens was actually a very strategic choice by Irwin Beadle for writing the first ever dime novel. By 1860, Anne was a very well-established author and quite famous in her own right. Anne's career actually began in 1834, where she and her husband co-founded the Portland magazine. While he served as publisher, she was co-editor and the main writing contributor.
I've been making up songs about how much I love Portland, Maine, and they're called Portland, Maine, all of them.
In 1837, she was a contributing editor and writer for Ladies' Companion, with her presence actually helping grow the magazine's circulation from 3,000 copies a month to 17,000 copies a month. And in 1841, she was an associate editor of Graham's magazine alongside Edgar Allan Poe. And between 1842 and 1853, she was actually the co-editor of Peterson's magazine. There, she was paid more than any other author, including male authors, by the publisher to secure her exclusivity. From 1854 to 1856, she edited Frank Leslie's Gazette of Fashion, and from 1856, she published and edited her own magazine, Mrs. Stevenson's Illustrated New Monthly, which was eventually merged and bought out by Peterson's in 1858. Beadle & Co. picked Anne because of her success. And that was a strategic move on their part, so that way the dime novel had a good and popular launch. And they actually acknowledged this in the publisher's note. Quote, "May be referred to as a work representative of the series that is to follow, every volume of which will be of the highest order of merit from the pens of authors whose intellectual and moral excellencies have already given the writers an enviable name in this country and in Europe." It wasn't a male author who launched dime novels, it was a woman. Mala Eska in total sold over 500,000 copies, which more than covered the $250 copyright fee that Beadle & Co. apparently paid Anne. And just for reference, according to a September 1860 article that I read, Beadle & Co. claimed that they paid authors on average $75 to $150 per manuscript, which means they paid Anne a lot more than they were paying their other authors. Women were crucial to the success of the dime novel, like Meta V. Victor and Mary A. Denison. In The Forgotten Era, Race and Gender and Anne Stevenson's Dime Novel Frontier by Rebecca Wingo, she states, "For the early period of the dime novel, so 1860 to 1870, a female audience dominated the readership, in part because female authors contributed a significant portion of the published novels, penning approximately 1/5 of all dimes. Shelley Strebe asserts that from 1860 to 1865, that percentage was even higher. Citing the Civil War as the main leading cause in the decline of male authors, Strebe notes that women penned 1/3 of the novels during that 5-year span. So by choosing Anne as their premier author and catering to a female demographic, this was how Beadle & Co. was able to secure their commercial success. They were releasing 2 books a month, with each initial print run being between 60 to 70,000 copies. And for successful stories like Mala Eska, they were doing new print runs every single month. Now, these numbers are huge, okay? By any publishing standard, these numbers are insane. For example, with my first book, The American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking, link in the description below, the initial print run was only supposed to be, I think, around 7,000 copies. But because pre-orders were so successful, my publishers were excited to bump it up to 12,000 copies. And it's pretty incredible because, frankly, most books don't sell more than 3,000 copies, ever. in their lifetime. By all accounts, dime novels helped further democratize popular media and reading. They catered to a more diverse audience and paid women seemingly fairly for their work. Like, what could go wrong? Part 2. The fall of the dime novel. The verdict of the whole country is that they are the best and most commendable works of fiction yet brought within the reach of the homes and firesides of America. While Beadle & Co. started out with the best of intentions and a lot of commercial success, their popularity resulted in a massive pushback and heavy criticism by the 1870s. It is evident that such reading must weaken and degrade the mind prodigiously, and indeed it is found that lovers of dime novels can read little else. By the same rule that strong drink evidently weakens the body, tales so exciting weakens the intellect. So what started off as a positive thing, or at the very least a neutral thing in the development in the world of publishing, very quickly devolved and started getting blamed for things like murders and crimes, almost exactly like what happened to video games in the 1990s and 2000s.
Obsessed with a violent so-called first-person shooter called Call of Duty when they get home. But is this just good fun, or is an entire generation being trained and desensitized to the act of shooting people?
Archie Brown, who was hanged for murder in the city a few weeks ago, confessed on the scaffold that he had been a victim to dime novel reading. It was this that caused him to have a thirst for blood, and he was not satisfied until that thirst had been slacked. Ark.
First time.
So what I find interesting about this criticism is the fact that it actually centers almost entirely around young boys and men. Very little conversation happens around women, and if it is, it's usually that like women don't want to go be good wives, like they don't want to go cook for their husbands or take care of the children. They just want to sit and read their smutty little books all day. Not that that doesn't sound familiar.
Do you want to form an alliance with me?
Absolutely, I do.
Good, good, excellent.
And in fact, I actually found an article defending working girls reading novels, in part because it gave them escapism and the hopes and the dreams of moving up in the world and creating a better life for themselves. So this just demonstrates how quickly the reader demographics changed after the Civil War, and also how popular dime novels were. The critiques center not just around violence, but that they, rotted their brains and weakened their minds. Also, it was low quality writing and not a good example of great American literature, which I find interesting because, at least from what I've seen in reading spaces and conversations and critiques around fiction, a lot of those same arguments are used today, but they're centered around books and genres that are dominated by the female demographic, like romances. However, it is classism that is actually the root of the pushback of the dime novel. The middling and upper classes were not the main demographic reading dime novels. It was, in fact, the working and lower classes. From Cheap Stories, Notes on Popular Fiction and Working Class Culture in 19th-Century America by Michael Denning. Though 20th century critics have represented the dime novel as a part of, quote, our American boyhood, which, by the way, is a super sexist take and completely dismisses the role that women had both in the creation and the popularization of the dime novel. But then again, are we really surprised that early 20th century and late 19th century research on the dime novel completely ignores women? No. Almost all 19th century middle class observers portrayed it as their reading. The reading of the other classes, the workers, and the immigrants. It's giving big wow.
You refuse to read classic literature. Not a question, it's a statement, I can tell.
But it is here, both in the popularity of the dime novel as well as its criticism, that we can see the true origins of modern publishing. Modern publishing doesn't come from classic literature, it comes from dime novels. The Victorians also criticized the dime novel for the same things. No longer were dime novel authors representative of great American writers like Anne S. Stevens, but instead they were, quote, many men whose names are utterly unknown in literary circles. Read the upper classes. is, but who grind on unceasingly, day after day, year after year. So yeah, authors were working on this sort of rise and grind model of producing dime novel stories. $50 is the fixed rate with publishing houses, and few writers are able to turn out about 2 books a week. The process of their production, it may be imagined, so this might not even be true, but we're just gonna roll with it, is mostly mechanical. They seize upon a plot in some newspaper or in personal experience and simply grind out so many thousand words about it. They are chiefly variations on the same old theme. This sort of energy actually reminds me of Ruby Dixon, who is the author behind the Ice Planet Barbarian series. And that series went viral on TikTok, I think back in like 2020, 2021, and she is prolific in her writing, okay? Like, this woman puts out almost a book a month. I know this because I've read most of them, okay? And she is extremely formulaic in her approach to storytelling, especially in the Ice Planet Barbarian series. It is predictable down to the percentage of the book about what is going to happen. Ruby Dixon isn't out here trying to write like the next great American novel or whatever, even though I would argue that Ice Planet Barbarians probably deserves this place on that shelf, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Have you ever read Ice Planet Barbarians? But she is here writing accessible, easy to read, and fun stories about big blue aliens that appeal to a lot of people. The speed of which Beadle & Co. and other dime novel publishers at this point, and this quantity over quality mentality that inevitably results in printing mistakes, errors, and quality issues, was also a point of frustration and ire from Victorians. It's just like the criticism that we're seeing today around Iron Flame. Quote, "The story is of sea life, as the title indicates, and smacks altogether of that dime novel style. The typography is passable for beginner, but would be a disgrace from an old one in the business." However, these criticisms ultimately didn't really have a hugely negative impact on dime novels or cheap fiction or newspapers or magazines. In fact, the only thing that could unseat the dime novel as the main source of cheap entertainment was the advent of film and TV.
The author says his manuscript was turned down by the publishing houses.
Some of them read it through and mulled it over. Most of them said flat out no, and I didn't get any offers from anyone.
Part 3, how publishing works today, according to my own experience. Now look, before we dig into this and my experiences in publishing, I want to just kind of lay loose some groundwork here. We cannot forget that we live in a capitalist society, and the publishing industry is nothing more than a cog in the wheel of the industrial capitalist machine. They're not here for the greater good. Publishing companies are here to make money. It just so happens that the products they make fill up libraries, which are just one of the greatest inventions in society, period, of all time. And this is my friendly reminder, visit your local library. Now, with that in mind as well, if you, yes you, is someone who is very interested in the idea of getting published one day, I am super excited to tell you about the sponsor of this week's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes and members who come together to learn from professionals and experts in their field for wherever they are in their creative journey. This includes learning by doing classes and learning paths, which are a specially curated group of classes to help you master a specific skill set, which could be creative writing, character development, storyboarding, and even getting published. One of their featured classes, which is very relevant to today's video, How to Successfully Publish a Picture Book on Kickstarter by Mary Anna Lustosa, who has successfully self-published her children's book, A Color Named Love, through crowdfunding. Mary Anna walks you through each step on how to self-publish through crowdfunding, from marketing to storytelling to how to successfully create the pitch, including offering helpful PDF checklists that you can print off at home. So if you would like to turn your creative ideas into a lucrative side business in 2024, the first 500 people who click the link in the description below will get 1 month free of Skillshare. I adore Skillshare. It is one of my favorite places on the internet, and I'm sure that if you give it a try, you will love it too. So with that, thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now here's something that everyone needs to kind of understand. Publishers will always will want to publish your book as quickly as possible, okay? Publishers will not make money on your book if your book is not out. While yes, famous authors can take years to write the follow-up in their best-selling series and have a long, drawn-out, miserable timeline, publishers will only put up with that if they know that the end product is going to be a bestseller. And because publishers have to produce books as quickly and frankly as cheaply as they can while also keeping an eye out for like the next best American seller, they sit in this really weird limbo of quantity versus quality. So with that in mind, there are 2 ways that I know of to get traditionally published. The first is how my first 2 books were published.
Well, honey, I don't have a prayer.
And that is by working with a publisher directly. The second and probably most well-known way to get published is by working with a literary agent, where you develop your book proposal with their input and guidance, and then they take the book proposal and they shop it around to editors who they think will want to buy your manuscript. This is the process that I am currently going through. In fact, my lit agent is shopping around my latest nonfiction book to editors like as I film this.
I'm sweating and I'm panicking.
Now, when you work with an agent, you spend a lot of time working on your book proposal. And from what I was able to ask my agent, there's basically two types of proposals. There's the nonfiction proposal, and then there's the fiction/memoir proposal. For a nonfiction book, you don't have to have a completed manuscript. You have 2 sample chapters to show what the book is going to be like. This is totally different though for fiction and most memoirs, because in fiction, you have to have a completed manuscript. The only people who can get away with selling books just by pitching ideas alone are the really famous authors out there, those who are well established in the industry.
The timeline and future Sarah J. Maas book releases, which are obviously very important to us. So her next title, which is the 3rd in her Crescent City series, comes out on the 30th of January 2024, so that will fall into this financial year. And thereafter, we have 6 further contracted titles, so continuing this series and starting a new series as well.
90% of authors, you gotta finish the manuscript to sell the book. This also helps explain why there is like a sophomore issue in so many books, especially from relatively new authors. Because while you have essentially all the time in the world to write the first book, and it's going to have multiple editing hands on it, you're gonna have at least your lit agent edit the book, and then probably their boss is gonna edit the manuscript, and then you're gonna edit the manuscript before it even gets sent off to editors and publishers, and then those editors are going to edit the book if they buy it, and then there's going to be copyright editors, and there's going to be final reviews, and then you're going to do more edits. You just have so many different hands editing the first book ever that it makes sense that it is different than the second book, because while you might have all the time in the world to write the first book, you are only going to have a short amount of time to write the second book and follow-up books. And if you're not used to working on that timeline, that can really reflect in your writing, but also in the editing, because there's just not the same amount of time, nor are there the same people editing your book. Working directly with a publisher, totally different story. So much more simplified. What happens is the publisher reaches out to you, usually via email, and they're like, hey, we like you. Do you want to write a book for us? And then you get on a phone call or a Zoom meeting and you have like a brainstorming session, and then you send kind of like very elaborate TOC. It's like, it's not elaborate in the same way that like my current TOC is. It is a very aggressive outline of like how the book will be written. And then you write like a couple sample chapters as well, usually, just to kind of prove that you know how to put a sentence together and you're not like a terrible writer. And then from there, you have the contract, you sign the contract, and then you go directly into writing the book. Now, as for contracts, every single one is different. Every single one. And factors include whether or not you've ever written a book before, who the publisher is, what kind of book you're writing, if you have an agent who is negotiating on your behalf, and also probably other things that I'm forgetting too. Now, while contracts have several different clauses, as contracts do, covering a variety of topics, there are 2 basic points that are extremely relevant to this particular video. The first is the timeline of when the manuscript is due. Now, this varies depending on, again, the genre of the book, the publisher, the author, all of it. There's no set rules when it comes to timeline for manuscripts.
Thirdly, the code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
But from my own experience, for our very first book, The American Duchess Guide to Dressmaking, we only had 5 months to the day the contract was sent to us to write the complete manuscript for this book. That included sewing the 4 gowns and all of their accessories, the photography, the patterning, the research, all of it. It was rough. Now, because the first book sold so well, they offered us a second book like the day of release. We were able to negotiate more time for the manuscript for book 2. Instead of 5 months, we were given 7 months. And for my current nonfiction book proposal that my agent is shopping around, she says the industry standard is 18 months for this kind of book. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm gonna get 18 months. The publisher might only give me 12 months to write the manuscript. Now, as for publishing timelines, when we wrote the first book, we signed the contract on September 1st, 2016. The book was published Black Friday of November 2017. So that is just like 14 months from signing the contract to release. All this is to say is that publishers will always want to publish the book as quickly as possible, because up until that point that book is on the shelves and selling to people, publishers are actively losing money.
What about an advance? You have a new book in mind?
You see, for traditional publishing, authors will receive an advance, and that's basically a way for publishers to reserve the book and to kind of help fund the writing of the book. Now, this doesn't always happen in every situation and every circumstance. It should. So this isn't a case of fast fashion in publishing. This is just the risky nature of the publishing industry. In fact, most books never sell past their advance. So publishers are actively losing money, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing more predatory publishing practices and contracts, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I'm not here to fully defend the publishing industry. I'm just here to provide context to the situation. But this does bring me to another point. Fast timeline in publishing benefits everyone. While advance would imply that a huge chunk of money is paid to the author upfront to help them write the book, that isn't actually the case. Advances are broken down into incremental payments throughout the writing and publishing process of the book. One of the more common formulas for advance payments is that you receive a third of the advance 30 days after the signing of the contract, you receive another third 30 days after the submission of the manuscript, and then you receive the final third 30 days after publication. So that means actually the majority of your advance shows up after you've already done the work. It is absolutely in the author's best interest to write that manuscript as fast as they possibly can. The only reason George R.R. Martin can get away with taking 15 frickin' years to write Winds of Winter is because he's got that HBO money and he doesn't care. His publishers probably care though, if I'm being honest. They probably are very annoyed with him. I would be annoyed with him. I would be livid. Get your shit together, George. So for authors who want to work full time as a writer, quantity and speed are hugely important. Royalties are only ever paid out every 6 months. Usually it's April and October. And on top of that, you don't actually receive a single cent of royalty payments until you've paid off that advance payment.
It's not a liquid!
For example, for our second book, The American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Beauty, I just now, in the fall of 2023, received my first royalty payment for that book. It has taken, that book was published summer of 2019, so 4 years? 4 years before I saw a single cent of a royalty payment in that book.
We're in the money, the sky is sunny.
I genuinely have a hard time fathoming how people can be authors full time and actually function in this industry without just being absolute machines when it comes to writing. Now, the second and very important next part of this contract discussion is who has the final say, because you would probably assume it's the author, wouldn't ya? It's not. It's usually the publisher. So that means everything from how the cover looks to the editing style to what is included in the manuscript. All of that is decided by the publisher ultimately. Are you a pro Oxford comma girly and your editor isn't? Congratulations, you have now lost all rights to that Oxford comma, no matter how much it drives you abso-frickin-lutely insane. Ask me how I know. In the arms of the angel. With publishers having the final say, in addition to just having so many different hands work on a book, from editors to copy editors to graphic designers to the printers themselves, errors and mistakes, whether they be grammatic or printing errors, are bound to happen. So with all that in mind, that brings us to the final question. Does publishing have a fast fashion problem? On November 8th, Bloomberg published an op-ed entitled "TikTok is Turning the Publishing World into Fast Fashion." And while the title might make you think that the piece was going to be a well-researched article discussing broader, more industry-wide issues, the article was more about Rebecca Yaros's misuse and mispronunciation of Scottish Gaelic words in Iron Flame and Fourth Wing to create the foundation of the magical language and names of the world. As someone who lived in Scotland and is actually friends with a native Gaelic speaker, watching the internet collectively shit on Euros for her mispronunciation.
A lot of you already know this, but she mispronounced Scottish Gaelic words
and misuse of Scottish Gaelic words, while also not saying a single thing about Diana Gabaldon's frequent and aggressive use of the word Sassenach.
Can't just say Sassenach.
Which completely scandalized my friend because it is basically a slur, is not lost on me. And in this article, as well as subsequent TikToks, we see this like constant perpetuation of how book talk and TikTok has created this issue within publishing. Quote, "We're witnessing in real time how corners of the publishing industry have become akin to fast fashion, publishing out a steady stream of content because they know readers, influenced by social media reviews, will keep buying despite any glaring ethical concerns." And this is actually where I really take issue with this whole idea. Conflating fast fashion, which has had a devastating effect on the environment as well as human rights issues, to mediocre writing, print quality, and special holiday releases, completely negates the actual important issues that we are facing when it comes to fast fashion. For all my regulars out there, you really think I wasn't gonna like bring clothes into this at least a little bit, right? Comparing Red Tower to Shein is absolutely asinine. Completely downplays and softens how horrible companies like Shein actually are, while also completely overblowing what Red Tower Publishing does, which is just what every other publishing company does in the industry. It's just the industry. Red Tower Books, which is an imprint of Entangled Publishing, they're just really good at marketing, guys. And they actually make that a point of their business model. Our marketing team is on a mission to break the mold with every book we release. With one-of-a-kind custom advertising and promotion strategies and outside-the-box ideas, we work nonstop to take every book to the next level. How dare a company comes up with a viable marketing idea to sell their books to the public? What shame, what horror that they just do their job well. I'm scandalized. Oh, how can the marketing team live with themselves? While absolutely there is a discussion to be had on the environmental impacts of the publishing industry as a whole, that is not the sole responsibility of a single indie publisher, but it is the responsibility of the entire industry, mostly on the shoulders of the biggest publishers. And from what I can tell, they're already working on the problem. As of 2020, all paper used by Hatchet comes from the Forest Stewardship Certified and Sustainable Forestry Initiative fibers. HarperCollins aims to source 100% of their paper from certified recycled materials by 2025, and Macmillan, who by the way is the distributor of Red Tower Books and Entangled Publishing, their global operations have been carbon neutral since 2017. Honestly, the biggest reason why publishers aren't using only recycled materials at this point for their books is mostly just because of the cost. And I mean, we have to remember back in 2021, we had huge supply chain issues, and so they were just struggling to find paper there for a couple years just to have books on the shelf. Can fast fashion brands like Shein say that, or Temu? No, they can't, because they're garbage. Now, I'm not here just blindly defending the publishing industry. There is absolutely a discussion to be had when it comes to predatory publishing practices and fast publishing, but it's not within the world of fiction. That conversation actually needs to be had around cookbooks, DIY, and other non-fiction crafty books. One of the well-known players in this game was Callisto Books, who recently went under and had to be acquired by Penguin Random House and Source Books, but they were a feature of a 2019 New York Times article entitled, "Would You Write a Cookbook for Next to Nothing?" In 2017, the Dallas food blogger Urvashi Petrie published the Indian Instant Pot Cookbook. By any measure, it was a hit, selling more than 100,000 copies. But under the contract she signed with her publisher, Callisto Media, Miss Petrie received no advance. Callisto had asked her to develop 50 recipes in 3 months, but offered her no budget for recipe developing or testing. She fronted all costs. Over the last 2 years, Miss Petrie said that she has made $15,000 minus the cost of her expenses, solely from milestone payments, fixed bonuses given out if book sales exceed a certain number.
This stinks! This is total BS!
And the article goes on to discuss how this is actually a growing trend in the industry. Ms. Glick, a literary agent and vice president of Dystel, Goodrich, and Borat, described companies like Callisto Media as, quote, data-driven publishers that look at a trend, come up with an idea, and hire freelancers. Like Ms. Petrie, quote, to to do books quickly so they can get out into the market and take advantage of that trend when there's not a lot of competition. If anything is going to be compared to fast fashion, it's this sort of model, a predatory scheme that preys on bloggers and content creators who are not familiar with the industry to produce works at insane speeds for very little money and predatory payment schemes. But this sort of model can't really function in the fiction world. Because while authors can sell a nonfiction book with just 2 sample chapters, that's not how the fiction world works, remember? You have to have a completed manuscript in order to sell a work of fiction unless you're already super established, well-known, and famous in the industry. Y'all, the publishing industry was dying pre-2020. Barnes & Noble was going bankrupt. Borders is completely gone now. But because of Book Talk, we have seen just a boom, a huge boom in the publishing industry. From Publishers Weekly, led by fiction categories, unit sales of print books rose 8.9% in 2021 over 2020 at outlets that report to the MPD BookScan. Units sold were 825.7 million last year, up from 757.9 million in 2020. BookScan captures approximately 85% of all print sales. In 2020, unit sales were up 8.2% over 2019, which saw 693.7 million print units sold. With this sort of growth, of course, publishers are going to try to publish books that follow Book Talk and Bookstagram trends as quickly as physically possible. Not only is this a long set historic precedent, but it's just logical from a business sense. To act like a mass publication of a mediocre work of fiction that went viral on TikTok is somehow single-handedly destroying the publishing industry as well as the American literature legacy as a whole. It's so stupid. You guys remember Twilight, right?
And who are you most excited about seeing in the flesh tonight?
Emmett Cullen, yes. Okay. Yeah.
And it's subsequent fan fiction that just blew up in the literature world. 50 Shades of Grey. You guys remember those books, right? What? God.
Are you doing it?
Yeah, I'm filming.
Videos. You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey.
Oh, you're so big and strong and sparkly. Oh my god. Oh my god. Got it. While it is one thing to not like a book because the writing style isn't for you, or to be disappointed that the sequel to one of your favorite books of 2023 was not great, to try and center these critiques around there being a larger issue in publishing does nothing more than just show your own misunderstanding of the publishing industry, but also just the history of American literature. We also have to be extremely careful with how we have these conversations, because as we've already learned earlier in the video, these sort of critiques are actually historically steeped in classism and sexism. So while it is one thing to just not like someone's writing style and it just not be for you, that's totally fine. It is an entirely different thing to say the people who enjoy those books are stupid or shallow, or to claim that the author used ChatGPT to write the book because it was so bad. Easy to read novels full of tropes, plot holes, and mediocre writing are just as much a part of the historic legacy of American literature as Louisa May Alcott, Harper Lee, Madeline Miller, Ernest Hemingway, and R.L. Stine. So if you want to have a conversation about cultural respect in writing, fine, absolutely. And I think that Yaros's use of Gaelic serves as an excellent study point for what it means to show respect when pulling inspiration from a minority language. But that's not a conversation about fast fashion or fast publishing. That is a conversation about editorial responsibilities, research, and navigating the ever-evolving boundary line of what we consider respectful and decent in our culture and society. And if you want to discuss the broader issues within the publishing industry, like predatory contracts, workers' rights, and environmental impact, absolutely, that is also totally fine. But it needs to be done with the understanding that this is just a part of the publishing industry as a whole. Publishing has always favored speed and quantity over quality. But a book about a dragon riding college and a shadow daddy are not the cause of these issues. But it is in fact just the most recent example in a long, long line of popular books. And so with that, if you all enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. That does help me and you with the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please go ahead and do so. I would love for you just to come and hang out with me all the time. That would be stellar and amazing. And with that, a huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and I will see you all back here next time with another video. Bye! All by myself, don't wanna be all by myself anymore. We're vibing, we're cool, we're having a good time, we're partying. 1, 2, 3, 4, I declare some war. And I really should not have a microphone in my hands. I lose my f***ing mind when I put a microphone in my hands. Anyways, talking about our fifis and shit. 1, 2, 3, 4, show me what you want, some more. 5, 6, 7, 8, who do we appreciate? Mother! I'm always there in the shadows.